Is the first Tuesday of June. We're actually here focused on a digital world town hall and a very united ripple effect meeting. We appreciate you tuning in. I know that there may be a lot of moving parts and pieces in some of your lives, but we'll do our best to try and be flexible. So we'll spend as much time as we can going over kind of just what's the latest as of the last week and then asking you, allowing any kind of questions. If you have questions, you can ask them online at either the ripple effect.clear events or town hall.clear.events or digital at clear events. Those are three different meeting rooms that you can ask you any of the questions, or there's no inappropriate questions, but there are support folks that are on. I'm grateful for Wally as well as Terrence as well as Al fielding any kind of support related questions. This is a private membership association. Some of the content that we'll be looking at may be forward-looking content. As we've always talked about, it's primarily focused around decentralization. So how you combine phone storage and ultimately an ecosystem that's different than the current ecosystem that we're driving towards around centralization, providing an opportunity for really humanity to be able to have a choice, not just to be controlled with what's coming. So for those that are not aware, there's really the go-to-market strategy is really focused on Clear United. You just put on the chair right there. The chair right here. This chair right here, and I'll put it right there if you want me to. Just right here. Thanks, bud. And Clear United, where folks have been able to tell other folks around kind of the adoption of this being decentralized systems, and then also a direct approach where we're focusing specifically on governments. Crazy part of it is to be able to do that, you've got to actually physically be with these governments. So there's a lot more travel that's involved. For those that are not aware, this last week we actually spent a ton of time in DC, not this last week now, but the prior week on May 24th to the 25th, as well as spent a lot of time within the Pacific with different organizations, and actually started to be looked at as a form of a thought leader when it comes to kind of these future systems, because everybody, it's interesting, but a lot of folks don't understand how it's playing out. And some of the folks on the inside, whether it's with the United Nations or whether it's with the IHO or different organizations, they literally, some of them care to ask questions as we're working with different governments, and we're starting to brush shoulders with some of these organizations. But one of the things that I think is really important to focus on, and I won't be specific as to where we are today or what we're focused on or who we're actually meeting with over the next course of events for the next 10 days, but they're very important and key players in the whole ecosystem. I'm going to go ahead and show this real fast. So when we talk about centralized systems, I'm going to be really specific here. So when we talk about the combination of centralized versus decentralized, we're talking about specifically who owns the encryption keys, or what we call key management and derived keys for the future. Because whoever owns those can actually derive intelligence to see who the individuals are. So in a digital world, if everyone can see everything, but the individual is obfuscated or separated from their actions, you can actually have a form of privacy and accountability and actually hold folks or organizations accountable. So when we look at it that way, when we talk about the centralized side of things, and we layer on machine learning and artificial intelligence, we literally have an ecosystem, kind of like what we're seeing here. This is called the quant, and it's basically where you have what they call an overledger operating system or systems that combines in different networks. So these are using machine learnings, whether they're through APIs, whether they're through open network protocols, and they're connecting in on the left. You can see a lot of different social platforms, whether they're files or data or messaging or collaboration or productivity apps. It could be a document, it could be a presentation, it could be a tweet, it could be a song, it could be what you do, where you go, what you listen to, what you share, what you buy, what you search, all of it basically combined. And this is not something that is just new. This has been going on for a long time. When you look at what Google's done with Shopify, when you look, so for instance, they wanted to understand not only what people are searching, what they're actually buying, and what's being shipped. Because if you do that, you can understand behaviors. It's not just around a matter of profiling, because in the real world, it doesn't matter if people understand what you're searching and what you're buying. But when they control how you pay for it, and maybe how you think or do, that is when freedoms and choices start getting massively encroached. So on the left here, you'll see these different social platforms. You'll also see payments that basically come together, and in the middle, or at least elements of different chains. So as we've talked about historically, there's going to be different certification levels or disclosure levels where, and they'll be based upon a recommendation. So certain banking organizations or standards, supposed standard organizations, basically have recommendations around how anti-money laundering or know your customer details are shared or provided. So what that means is chains, if they want to be relevant or at least in compliance, they have to comply with gathering information around who the individuals are on the other side of it. As you know, that's the opposite of what blockchain is all about. It's about privacy, but providing transparency at the same time. So what you're going to see is a massive push, and you'll see some things that'll be regulated. Bitcoin will be a very interesting neutral ecosystem because it's somewhat difficult to see. Well, I shouldn't even say that, but the point being is you'll have rulings. So Security and Exchange Commission's finally coming out to have certain rulings on particular chains as it relates to security offerings, where they domicile, how do they work, what's the transparency, etc. And those are chains that are usually public, smaller chains, or I shouldn't say smaller, as far as the head count around organizations behind them. And then over on the right, you'll see more chains that are usually privatized. So you can actually have a blockchain-based technology that's privatized and or separated from or forked from another chain. So there's really different types of chains, but the key is they'll actually be regulated. So you'll literally be linking an individual's name to a decentralized system. So what you're effectively doing is you're centralizing decentralization. Now, when I say you, I'm saying this is where these centralized systems are going. So what we're doing is building the counterbalance to this system where true decentralization and key management can actually be an option and hopefully prevail. So what you have is payment gateways and banks as well as other providers. So these providers have data. Maybe they're streaming video, maybe they're watching certain purchases, maybe they're even providing a movie for you. But it's all about data, who you are, where you go, what's happening, and then how that actually ties into these different ledgers, and then how that information can basically be consumed and or read and or controlled by central systems. So really what we're talking about is building an alternative system to this, starting with governments. So when we talk about this go-to-market strategy, how can governments basically say, we'll go digital, but we also want to care about the privacy of our citizens. We actually want to care about the freedoms and the liberties of our citizens to govern themselves. Now, they need to be law-abiding people and they need to do things that are not wrong. As a matter of fact, most people think, like in blockchain-based technologies, that there's things that can be done that are wrong and no one will find out. But in our reality, it's very transparent. Like literally everything that happens within the blockchain-based systems is very, very transparent. So there's forensics that can automatically be deployed within this ecosystem that actually provide a layer of intelligence that's dynamic. So it can actually in a way police itself, even if they come from other chains. So I won't dig into the details of that, but I wanted you to understand that these are the primary things that we're focused on today is working with different governmental organizations to be able to provide an alternative to this centralized system. And so I'll go ahead and just kind of jump back down to this decentralized versus centralized screen and see if we can actually get this through. So this is really what the alternative and combatant opportunity is, not just opportunity, but the massive need is for humanity. So some of the largest, or I should say most influential financial systems and or nations connecting with others that maybe not as influential, but they actually care about sovereignty of their country, and maybe they don't look at it as privacy, but they care about the ability for their citizens to actually have their own autonomy and control over their own lives. So with that being said, we're basically just in the throes of setting up those appointments, or those meetings that have actually already been set up. They're directly with governments, they're directly with financial institutions, directly with reserve banks of different countries, and trying to link them to existing countries that have actually adopted this platform. So for those of you that are aware, for the last 5 months, almost 6 months now, well, the last month, we weren't in a lot of them. We just did a trip to DC. But for 6 months, we basically met with 16 different countries. We had three of them completely commit to the platform. We had five or six of them that basically said, and here, let me see if I can find a screen for you so you can see which countries they are, at least from the highlights. So these are some of them here. So in phase one, we're basically working with these countries, and they're from all around the world, right? So I could pull up a different map, just some updated systems here. So you basically have different countries that may be some of the smallest in the world. As a matter of fact, the first one to sign up is actually the third or fourth smallest country in the whole world, with only 11,000 citizens. And it just so happens that we've been able this last week to light up their infrastructure, and this is Tuvalu. And I won't actually show it because it's not right for me to do this here, but Tuvalu Life, an application, Tuvalu Pay, an application, Tuvalu Admin Systems, which basically helps them to run their information and productivity around, what different departments, who's doing what services, and then different services within an end user portal. And the way that this works, it's a web-based interface that actually ties to ClearLife or Fiji or Tuvalu Life in this case, that allows the user to start interacting with the systems. These are not centralized client server type systems. This is a web-based interface that is a centralized approach to authenticating and log in, but actually the credentials as well as the data is decentralized. And so that type of a system, it's much more complicated to roll out, but ultimately the first country has actually been stood up. It's not full production yet, but at least the deployment is active and live. So the goal is to connect some of these countries that are initially raising their hands with some very large countries that have solid weight, very solid weight, to be able to get them to align with these smaller organizations. So that's basically the focus today, and I shouldn't just say today, but there's also other phases. We won't talk about those just yet. But does anyone have any questions maybe around what the things we've talked about? Or even, I know that some of this may be new to some of you, but thoughts, questions, feedback? Go ahead and take anybody that raises their hand, whether it's in the digital world, town hall, or ripple effect. Thoughts, comments, recommendations, questions, feedback, it's all yours. I know we got started a little late, but we still do have a chunk of folks Let's see any of them on from you can actually communicate. But if you've got questions, now's your time. Go ahead. If not, we'll go ahead and wrap up the meeting early today. These are basically the topics that we're focused on helping to provide an alternative to what's being rolled out right in front of us. The time frame for the rollout is 2023. You're already seeing massive systems all around you. If you go to the store and you find a little cash machine that turns things into a digital credit, you have to ask yourself, is that digital credit something that is what they call e-money? Maybe it's on a credit card that's prepaid, or is it something that is actually a centralized system or a decentralized system? A ledger, if you will, like a bank balance. But you'll see a massive shift within the payment systems globally, and that's this year. Looks like we're not having any questions, even though there's folks online. So we'll go ahead and wrap up early. So we're at 20 minutes before we normally wrap up. I'll allow just for a little longer in case there are folks that do have questions. Otherwise, we'll wrap up in a second. So, yeah, I apologize about the noise as well as sorry. Oh, getting a lot of feedback from folks at the background. It's just way too loud to even ask questions from people. I apologize. You should have told me. I had some other headphones I was trying to get on. Okay, so with that and all the noise, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you for your time, your attention, and we appreciate you.